Welcome to Those Who Wander with Matthew Erler. I got Dr. Kellermann here today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Matthew.
Yeah, you are a legend around here.
You made yourself a legend too in this short time. Thanks.
Absolutely. It's great to have such a unique place to be able to explore and make a difference and really get, a part of the community. I got here in mid-January, and I was here with some buddies for a couple of weeks. And then I heard that the founder of the hospital was coming to the area. My buddies, they were all leaving, and I was like, hey, this is a great opportunity to meet somebody who's made just a colossal impact in the world. You've been in Nepal. You were volunteering for 2 years, more than that?
Yeah, 2.5, yeah.
And you volunteered in the Andes. You got an award from the Dalai Lama.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's been an interesting adventure.
Yeah.
Seemed like you're on that similar track.
Oh, no, sir. I am just an IT guy. I know computers. But, man, you have some incredible skills that have saved, I can't even imagine how many thousands of lives, either through your direct work or through your foundation that you set up, the Kellermann Foundation. I'll put some links into the description for the video. And wow, like the people here, I had Dr. Katie Grogan on the podcast last time, and we talked about the Batwa and the history and some of the things that you've done for them. And, they call you grandfather of the Batwa. I mean, you saved so many people, and now the hospital that you built has over 100 beds, treats about 30,000 people a year. There was 8 births over the weekend while you were in Queen Elizabeth with the Abbeys.
Actually, 18.
18 births. Sorry, yeah. 18 births.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's 3 a night, but you've written this book. You've an African Gift. I'll put some links for that in the bios as well. And, your story is truly incredible, and, I'm honored to be in your presence. So I just wanted to do a little introduction for you. I don't know if I've, mischaracterized anything. I've probably missed tons of stuff, but, I was very close to leaving, and then I decided to stay because I had a chance to spend time with you and learn. And now for sure I am leaving in about 4 or 5 days. Visa's expiring. I got plans to be back in the States and to travel a little bit more. And thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for coming over. I do appreciate our relationship, by the way. Our conversations, we've sort of solved several questions about the meaning of life over the course of the 6 weeks or so.
Yeah.
And it's been fun.
Yeah.
I had some adventures, game parks, and and of course with IT, you've turned around both our hospital and the Batwa development program.
I'm hoping to do even more in my next trip and my next visit. So,
right. Well, you're always welcome here. It seems like you resonate well with the African culture. I mean, in every way, it's the culture, the traditions, the people. You even can dance.
Yeah. Hey man, I like a good party. Last night was a lot of fun. I mean, you came out, we had some drinks, celebrated my time here. Sure. I'm never gonna forget it. And I think it's definitely changed my life and my outlook in so many different ways. But
Africa has a tendency of doing that too, by the way. I mean, you come out here to help, and somehow your life has changed in ways you never could have imagined.
I know. I feel like I have some vastly different perspectives, and I feel like we have so much to talk about. And I think your story has been told in books and interviews and in so many different places. And I highly encourage, everyone who's listening to explore, what this man has done for the world. But there's something I wanted to take a different approach on, because I'm thinking about my future and my life, and how do I make an impact the way this man has made an impact in the world. And I want to know, when you were young, what was the trajectory that you were on that brought you here? Just a small change in a young person's life can extrapolate over decades and years into such a profound profoundly different life and impact on the world. So what do you think? Where did this begin?
Well, I remember when I was age 6, I knew I wanted to be a doc. And I had a pediatrician who really cared for me and really neat lady. And so the upshot was I knew from that moment on, I really never had any course corrections. And I knew I was going to be a doc. But then later on, probably age 12 or 13, I was reading a little bit of Schweitzer. And I said, wow, sometime in my life, I'm going to be a doc in Sub-Saharan Africa. And so,
What
man,
age was that when you knew that
age
was
12 or 13.
age 12? Was there
Yeah.
something on television,
No,
something
just
you
reading some
read? Or?
Schweitzer stuff.
Okay.
And, because, man, I thought that'd be wonderful to come here and work with an indigenous population and kind of throw yourself into medicine and work in a remote part of the world. And it took several iterations before we finally got here. Like I say, we went to Nepal. I was in private practice for quite a few years, several decades. And then finally ended up coming over here to do a needs assessment on the Batwa pygmies. And then
Did someone ask you to do that, or did you volunteer?
I'm Episcopalian, and Episcopalians are not involved much with overseas mission work. And so after we got back from Nepal, every summer, my family and I would go someplace in the world and work because we enjoyed our experience so much in Nepal. We went to Nepal when our youngest son was 1 year old, and then had another kid that was born there. It was really a transformative experience there in Nepal. So we decided, since we're not going to do a big chunk like that for a while, that every summer we would take time off and go someplace in the world and work. And back to Nepal, Central America, South America. My wife had a reticence to come to Africa because my subspecialty is tropical medicine, and she knew what she would encounter when she came, and so she had a reticence to come. But then once early in the winter, we were looking as a family where to go the next summer, and I said, "Oh, let's Google Episcopal missions." And because actually, it's almost like an oxymoron. You usually don't see those two terms together, Episcopal missions. And so some came up, Episcopal medical missions. Whoa, you kidding me? Never knew they existed. And they wanted somebody to do a survey of the Batwa pygmies, the ancient inhabitants of the Bwindi Community Forest. And
at this time, you were a co-founder of a hospital, working as a doc in California.
Working as a doc, full-time practice, private practice as a doc.
But it's a huge sacrifice to take all that time to go to Nepal, go to Africa. How do you square that? How did you make that work?
Economically, it is.
Yeah.
No question. I could have made more money if I'd stayed in the saddle at my medical practice. But, what do you want out of life?
That's something I noticed as well. I was IT contractor for the military. I pursued education and careers that I thought would make the most amount of money for the least amount of effort. And, I was pretty successful at it, I think. But I found that enough money is never enough. And it didn't take me long to figure that out. When you're negotiating from one job to the next job, getting new offer letters every 6 months or a year. So, I basically just followed the playbook for how to find money, as a working guy, not necessarily a small business or, innovative investor or, inventor, but as like a run of the mill, almost guaranteed shot. This is the playbook to make the money. And yeah, it's enough is never enough. But I mean, was that a problem for you? Were you ever looking for the money or chasing it?
There was opportunity to make money, and we did make money. I don't want to downplay that. I mean, in my medical practice, I did well enough to retire at 56. But I always thought, because our time in Nepal was so influential for me, I worked at a Christian medical mission, but say you got to spend a little time with the Dalai Lama in northern India and Dharamsala, and then got to know the Rinpoche, the Buddhist guys, and it was interesting when we drove across. The way we got to Nepal was we thought that easiest way to go would be to fly to Germany by a VW bus and drive across Asia to Nepal with a 1-year-old. And, a frame of reference was a desktop globe, and it was only a couple of inches on a globe. How long could that take? And ended up taking 4.5 months of travel.
Were you
With lots
stopping
of
along the
adventure.
way?
Well, we went through Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, all these incredible countries. You don't want to just blow by.
And this was in the 70s.
Late 70s.
Yeah.
So then we had a chance to spend some time with the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala. And I said, hey, what can we do to help? And he said, help my refugees, the Tibetan refugees. I said, okay, we can do that. So when I went to Nepal, we worked with Tibetan refugees. I set up a clinic for the refugees, and every week I'd spend a day up at the Tibetan monastery with the Rinpoche, and that was transformative, hanging out with the monks and the Rinpoche. And
you even learned the language, Nepali, right?
Yeah, I could speak Nepali. The Rinpoche could only speak Tibetan, so sometimes our conversations, we had a translator, Tibetan to Nepali, so sometimes our conversations were difficult, but fun, and he was very patient with me.
And you also learned the local language here, in I forget the name of the province, but it's Ruchiga. Yeah, it's fun listening to you banter and negotiate prices. We're getting back from Queen Elizabeth or somewhere, maybe the refugee camp, and you were like, Matt, you good at bartering? Let's go barter for some matoke.
Sure.
And you got out, and I'm pretty sure that lady was flirting with you somehow. But you guys were having a great time going back and forth about prices, and I don't know, I couldn't follow anything. Obviously, I don't speak Ruchiga, but I know I didn't do any bartering. So you're the master there. But it's amazing to see you interact with people.
The people here are very friendly. I mean, I find them very similar to Nepalis, very hospitable, very welcoming, very willing to engage, and they like to laugh.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
What a deal that is.
It's always a laugh with you. I think we have a lot of fun together. It's been just a great experience to see the master at work, essentially.
Well, we have one rule: if you come out and work, and I encourage your listeners here to do it, but the one rule is to have fun. I mean, you spend all the money and you're coming all the way here and you're taking time out of your life. If you're not enjoying it, the difference between fun and joy is joy. Going to refugee camps, it's not really in the fun category, but there's a lot of joy. And
I have memories I'll never forget from that place for sure. And, I hope that I can, make an impact with people in that kind of situation. I think I've learned many things being in this area, in this town, and in this country, and it makes you appreciate, what we have in the United States, but it also makes me think, globally and bigger picture wise, there are some very serious problems here on Earth. And, in some places, voting might not be a good option. It's not an option that will break the cycle, and, writing books and starting hospitals and doing these things, maybe that's the small little snowball that starts at the top of the mountain, but by the time it reaches the bottom, that small amount of compassion or that time and effort put in, can have a big impact down the road. And I look forward to being a part of the story here in Bwindi for many, many years to come, because I want to see how this changes for the better, and I want to see how these things really, really unfold over time.
Oh, you will. I mean, you've already been part of the process, and my guess is the biggest influence is having you folks like you come and see the needs and just jump in like you did, just engage wholeheartedly, and take up the slack whenever you can, and work with people and get inspired. It's the best part of it.
Yeah, I think there's obviously something to be said for walking a mile in someone's shoes, but I think being here makes me realize that phrase is very inadequate, because just being here doesn't mean I'm walking in anyone's shoes. Are struggling, and they have, an outlook. They have that positivity, that hope, and I'm never going to be able to be in their shoes ever. It's not going to happen. But you can walk with them, and not just a mile, but you can walk all the way to the end. And that's something that I've appreciated. Just the fact that we're going to relate on a human level. We're going to relate on maybe a more spiritual level. But with these, even just being here and walking with them, I feel like people appreciate it, and they see that at least one Mzungu is not blasting through in 2 days and leaving. This one is actually maybe staying around and experiencing. I've met farmers on my walks. I've talked to, the old, the young alike. The English is sometimes hard, but we communicate well either through a smile. I do a lot of smiling at people, a lot of waving, a lot of handshaking, hand holding. It's remarkable. When I walk to the guest house, I stay away from the main road because I don't like the dust and I don't like all the vehicles. Mm-hmm. So I'll walk, through the village mostly, or, up in the hills. And kids will come up and they'll hold my hand for a little while as we walk around. And it's, how can you not be changed by that? And, wow. It's just beyond words, isn't it?
I mean, I think the most important thing you can give to the people, and that's what you're giving, is a gift of presence. I mean, we all as Americans want to come in and do something, see something knocked out, schools, hospitals, whatever. Water systems, homes. I get that. But the most important thing and the gift you've given these people is a gift of your presence. And that's what I feel for me. Learn the language and customs, traditions is, I mean, I had to do it if I was going to make an impact here at all. But
so we've talked a little bit about this. Like, you've had friends, colleagues, people that have taken probably the more common path in life. They have their careers in the United States, they make their money, they buy the houses and the boats and all that, but you've taken, an entirely different approach to life. Any regret?
Yeah, I mean, wife and I saved a lot of money and spent a lot of it, so I get some pushback from my wife that a retirement plan is not quite what it used to be. But, I got dock friends that have planes and boats and, wine, women, and song, and spend it that way. I think this is a lot better way to spend your money.
So what does success look like for you? Because, I've had many mentors in the past, that have made me who I am today. And you're my mentor now, certainly. And I hope that, our meeting, has a great impact in my future, and I can absorb and learn as much as I can. Thank you for the last 2 months that we've been able to hang out basically daily.
I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, but what does success mean? How do you see success? Because I've had other mentors that, made their, millions or billions or however much, and that was how they defined their success. But we'll drive 100 miles away from here in Queen Elizabeth, and you'll slap the side of the truck with the hospital logo and be like, "I'm Scott," and people will be like, "I know you. Yeah. We've met," or "I was born near there," or "at the hospital," and that's you've shown me an entirely different way to measure success and a fulfilled life, But what does it mean, Dave?
Yeah, success. I mean, you can make a lot of money, but I've noticed my friends, my colleagues who have made a lot of money don't seem to be any happier than me. As a matter of fact, many of them don't seem to be happy, period. Because that's not the ticket to joy. I mean, my guess is success is figuring out who you are. I mean, we've had this conversation before. If you can figure out who Matthew is and who God has made you, I mean, you're not me and I'm not you. I don't do IT. You don't do medicine. But how you figure out truly who you are. And this is a great crucible for that, because a lot of rough edges get knocked off really quickly. And because there's no privacy here, no filters that you can hide behind that, People really want to know. And you've been asked, who are you? Why are you here? What are you doing? Why in the world are you here when you can be making all this money in the United States? And they ask the hard questions about life. Why are you here? Why are you giving? What's the meaning of service?
Well, I ask myself those questions too.
Well, you got to.
I certainly, I don't. I feel like a lot of my thoughts are like circles, right? You start with an idea and you'll spend a long time thinking about it, and you'll really digest it, and eventually you'll come back around right where you started, or at least that's the way it feels. Yeah. And I do ask myself, what, because I think I quit my job maybe 10 months ago. I've been traveling for 6 months. I haven't been home in that time. I spent 2 months in Guatemala. I've spent, three months here, some little time elsewhere. And I think about my future, because I don't necessarily plan on going back to a 9 to 5, hopefully for a while, because I feel like there are other ways to live life. But, being here has definitely made me think about what my goals are and, what I want out of the future. So, and man, I've learned so much. But what have you learned? What do you wish you would have known when you first started this whole thing?
Well, if I can reflect on Schweitzer again, he said, I don't know what your destiny in life will be, but one thing I know for sure, those of you who will be most happy who have sought and found how to serve. And actually, your tenure, Lockheed Martin, I mean, it was economically, worthwhile for you, but also my guess is you served some of your colleagues, and that's where you found the joy. So the service doesn't have to come to Sub-Saharan, deep, dark Africa. I mean, it can certainly be in your own community. And service can be remunerative. If you really are engaged in the work and you really care and you throw yourself into it in every way, you give your whole being to it, and you're helping out your colleagues and supporting them, then my guess is that you'll find a lot of joy.
I certainly have. It feels good to serve others and, to make an impact on something that I resonate with, something that I feel like truly matters, and yeah. But I think I remember when we very first met, maybe this first moment, you don't remember as well as I do, but I'll never forget it. I walked into the guest house, you were having dinner, the table, everybody was there. I walk in, it got a little quieter, and I was like, Dr. Kellermann, good to meet you. I understand that you founded this hospital, and you said something along the lines of, yeah, it was good, but it was also, bad. There was some mistakes made along the way. And I never followed up with that, but I wanted to follow up now. What did you mean that there were some mistakes that you were responsible for as well? Maybe this is a tough one, but
no, it's not. The Batwa culture we work with have no future past tense in their language. It's all present tense.
Right.
So if you talk with a Batwa about goal setting, strategic planning, it's kind of not going to work very well.
Right.
It's a great way to live, living in the moment, simply because people who live in the moment are living lives that are mindful. If you're here now, I enjoy sitting here with you and talking. I enjoy the questions you're asking me, even though some of them are pretty tough. This is the essence. This is all we got. Past is gone, future's yet to come. So we only got right now, and the Batwa know that. However, you're supposed to begin with the end in mind. If I knew this hospital would have grown like this, and if I knew the nursing school would have grown, if I knew the Batwa development program, then I would have done things differently. I would have purchased more land. I would put more strategic plans in place for it.
Well, you already purchased so much land. You purchased so much land around here, and you did it at a great time too, because the land property value around here is insane.
We just tried to negotiate on a piece of property this morning that kind of went south, but that happens. But just in general, I think I would have put more things in place so that the hospital would be more self-sufficient when we got to this stage.
Right.
And because when I came out, I felt like I was a pretty good doc, but I had no training in administration, human resources, logistics, and so my wife and I, the hospital got to about 30 or 35 beds. She was doing the accounting and hated it. I was doing administration. I hated that too. We shared human resources and logistics, which neither one of us did a very good job. We worked really hard at it, and we're not doing a very good job. And our lives were kind of spiraling down. And then we had a mentor. I mean, I didn't know he was a mentor, but he came over as a mentor with Rotary, a guy named Jerry Hall. And he came over to help us unload a container of, of equipment that Rotary had donated. Sadly, the equipment didn't arrive for 3 or 4 months after they went home. It got delayed in Mombasa, but I didn't realize he did strategic plan for major business. He was a strategist. So I said, whoa, why don't you sit down with our management team? And our management team was not very well trained. I trained them. And they're a lot of fun. You know, like Elphas, he was a good friend. He was our accountant, but he couldn't add or subtract. But he had a lot of integrity, so we had a lot of fun with him.
That's the most important thing when you hire an accountant is the integrity, especially when you're running this nonprofit.
Well, we come to work one day and he says we're bankrupt. I said, if I should drop the
if the guy can't add or subtract.
Yeah, but we'd have some laughs in the process, and that's important. So Jerry sat down, and so our management committee meetings, we have a lot of laughs, but nothing get accomplished because they really weren't management people. So
Jerry Hall.
Yeah, he sat us down and he said, let's do a SWOT analysis, and he said, what things could end your hospital immediately? And number one, if the rebels come across from the Congo and kill everybody.
Which they did.
Did in 99.
Yeah.
And Jerry said all his years of business, he's never heard that one. And then the second one is if Scott and Carol's my wife, left. And so I said, hey, time out, Jerry. Are we in the same category as a rebel group? And he said, I'm afraid so.
Oh, geez.
So the essence.
Because that was my observation as well. Like, geez, the Kellermann Foundation, it carries your name. You know, when you're out here, things get moving. You know, you prod people, you get people to where they need to go. You get people communicating who need to communicate. Like, you're truly, I've seen some directors at work, I've seen some business leaders, but your ability to engage and get people motivated and involved at all levels of the organization is just incredible, I think. How you have to be that type of person to have the amount of success and start all the organizations that you've started. So it is incredible. You are a linchpin around here.
Yeah, but that's, you might get lynched in the process, but
because you've had to deal with hitmen and lawsuits, and now they're trying to run you out of town with the music at night.
Yeah, beaten and left for dead, and all those. I mean, that happens in Sub-Saharan Africa. You gotta kind of roll with the punches.
I know. I don't know how you've done it, to be honest. Like, because I've been here, 3 months? A little drop in the bucket compared to your 20 years, right? And I find things that are discouraging, Maybe you could tell a short story, maybe about when you were discouraged in the course of building this hospital, and maybe how you overcame. Because you must have so much tenacity to build something in an area that has so many challenges, resources, funding, corruption of the government, difficulty, at all stages. How do you do this, honestly?
One of the central organizing stories for me was meeting Batwa, and actually I just saw her daughter at a burial a couple of days ago. And Batwa is a traditional healer. Some people call them witch doctors. And years ago, we were having a lot of wrestles with a lot of situations. Life was it was difficult. The vehicle was always in the shop, and government was giving us a hard time, and on and on. And then relations with the traditional healers was not good. And so a colleague of mine from med school came over. His daughter was working with us, and he brought his daughter over, and he spent a month with us. And he was a holistic guy. And what he wanted to do was kind of study traditional ways of practicing medicine. And after a month over dinner, he said, you have a hard time working with the Abafumu. Abafumus are called traditional healers, or some people call them witch doctors. So I said, yeah, man, they got terrible practices. They make cuts in the skin, put herbs in it. They take hot implements and burn over the area they think is problematic, kind of drive out the evil humors. So a kid come over with pneumonia and he'll have second and third degrees over burns
Wow.
over his chest. And more problematic is when kids of age 6 to 9 months, the maternal antibodies start to wane. They start getting frequent infections at the same time that the lower canines erupt. So they'll take a sharp instrument and dig out the lower canines.
Just mutilating the mouth.
It's called infant oral mutilation. So
Jesus.
I can't work with them. You say, well, but in my studies, 90% of your patients at your hospital have seen an opportunity before they come see you. You say you can't work with them. I'm telling them you can't work without them. So we agreed to meet. And one day the drums went off and they all came in, some dressed in their traditional garb. We went around the room introducing ourselves, and they all had subspecialties: lightning strike, potency, malaria, childbirth they dealt with. And then when it came around to me, I said, you have any problem working with me? And one of the lead Abafumu stood up and he said, we think you're judgmental. And I said, kind of got me on that one, but I'll hold judgment. If you find me being judgmental, you let me know. And then he kind of takes a step forward me and says, what do you think about our practices of Bouchard cutting, or Murillo the burning, or Bino pulling the teeth? What do you think about our practices? That's kind of like the deer in the headlight. And what do you say? If I said it was unconscionable, which is what I really believe, meeting's over.
They might not come back. The hospital might not have been able to succeed.
No, it would have been done. And this elderly lady named Batuza stood up in the back of the room, and Levihume at the PDP, he was at the meeting. He elbows me and he said, that's Batuza. And my blood ran cold because I knew Batuza by reputation. She was the most powerful Abafuma in the valley. With the curse, she would die. People would come to her clinic and say, what's the matter with you? Batuza's cursed me, and they would just kind of wither away. And Batuza had these.
Wait a minute. What did you just say? That this lady, the leader of the witch doctors, essentially, would curse somebody and they would start withering away?
Yeah, we'll talk after this about some of the curses. So anyway.
Well, I feel like some of the listeners might want to know about this one. That sounds juicy. Well, is this real? Just to say that. Did she have a real power to do that? Or was there something in the water that they were putting in the water or something? How do they wither away?
I don't know. They just stop eating and they get depressed, and they just,
oh man,
we try and, force feed them, and they just kind of, but we can talk.
Okay.
I mean, there's a whole constellation of stories but Batuza kind of stood up, and she was old. She was really withered and had a cane, and she kind of worked her way over to this guy that still wanted to know the answer. And she put her hands on his shoulders and kind of pushed him in his seat and said, we're going to talk about what we have in common, not our differences.
So she was supportive of your mission.
Yeah, but she was. But, she was a traditional healer through and through.
Right.
But she said, we need to talk about what we have in common. And that rocked me. I cried. I said, man, can you imagine a world where we talk about commonalities rather than differences? And these are the people that were as diametrically opposed to anybody that I'd ever worked with before. Practices that were unconscionable, and yet she was saying, we have commonalities.
And I think that top one was, wanting to help people and give people better lives, less suffering, longer lives.
Yeah, Hippocrates said when there's love of medicine, there's also love of humanity.
Right.
And so before the meeting broke up, we went outside and we sang and we danced and broke bread together. And then we came back in and they said, can you help us with Omashwiza?
It's malaria, right?
It's malaria. I said, yeah, I can help you. And they said, too many of our children are dying of malaria. I said, I get that. I said, just the week before, we'd lost 2 kids and a pregnant mother from malaria because of, they would be late presentations of the disease because the Alafuma would kind of fiddle with them. But eventually get them in the hospital, and then they were in extremis, and we couldn't save them. So I said, sure. I said, we've had trouble distributing bed nets because people believe that malaria is caused by Stan, a demon. And
I'm from Minnesota, so for me, it is malaria is spread by a demon, the
mosquito.
mosquito. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So I said, why do you think that? And they said, because kids under age 5, if they get malaria, can get cerebral malaria, and they start seizing. And seizures of demon possession, and that's how. No. So the next session, we decided to meet again. A few weeks later, we took them down to the hospital, showed them what the parasite looked like under the microscope, and then we had medical students do drama for the life cycle of the Anopheles mosquito fighting at night. And we said, bed nets can stop this, and they agreed. So they went out helping.
Well, they were kind of resistant at first, right?
Oh, really
they didn't believe that it could be transmitted by mosquito. They believed again that it was like demons.
Yeah. So we engaged them. They continued their practices, but they helped us distribute bed nets. And
how many bed nets was it?
Initially 30,000.
30,000 bed nets.
And we noticed our malaria rates drop. We were losing 1 or 2 kids a week. A few years later, we go 6 to 9 months without a kid dying of malaria.
And that must have built up a lot of credibility for your practice and your outlook on things. Probably the more scientific method of approach to it.
So again, witch doctors and how the curses are problematic. So fast forward a few months, I'm walking up in the hills, going to visit villages, and saw a group of old men sitting under a tree talking. That's what old guys do, as you've noticed. They sit around and talk and drink tea and maybe knock back a little bit of the local liquor. And so they invited me over, and I sat with them. And in the course of the conversation, they said, "How you doing?" I said, "God, I don't know. Things are really looking up." I said, "Our vehicle was always in a shop and it's been running well. The government was on our backs, and they're not giving us a hard time anymore. And wife and I are doing well, and life seems to be great. Gray skies are gone. Blue skies up above." And they said, "When do you think that started to change?" And I said, "I don't know. I usually carry a journal in my backpack, so I pulled out the journal and flipped back, and I said, well, looks like about 3.5 months ago." "Oh, you're right." And they just started laughing and laughing. And I said, "What are you laughing about?" And they said, "When did you meet the Abafumu?" And I said, "Oh, it's about that same time. Think there's any kind of correlation?" Laugh again. And they said,
what was funny though?
Well, they said after that first meeting with the Abafumu, they realized that you could work together. They went up and had an all-night curse removing ceremony.
Really?
Because they had been cursing you.
Oh my!
And did the curse work? Was that the reason the vehicle's always in the shop? And and the government's giving us a hard time, and Carol and I sometimes seem to be not on the same path. I don't know, but it's good. So the essence is, Matthew, is not to enrage your local witch doctor.
Yeah.
That's a
you always want. You never alienate the locals. That's for sure. Yeah. Holy cow! Are the Abafumu still around? Still?
Batuza sadly got run over by a boda and died. But
bodas.
I know. Yeah, we work. And
are those practices still being passed on? And they're still prevalent in the area?
So the essence is, we started meeting with the Abafumu, and we did malaria. We've taken on HIV. We've taken on TB, a lot of other diseases, and now they've become the backbone of our 550-member village health team. And each of those village health team members is responsible for 20 to 25 households. Their eyes, ears, and feet on the ground, reporting disease, bringing in women that are pregnant, checking if somebody's coughing a lot, thinking they might have malaria. TB, they'll bring them in, making sure kids are sleeping under the bed net. They're public health officers,
right,
out in the community.
Okay, that's a great transition into the present, I guess. Maybe there's a better way to say it, but one thing that does spark my curiosity a little bit is are there any practices of the Abafumu that, change the way you practice, or, change, have some good value in your, daily efforts of trying to relieve suffering and keep people alive? And
Yeah, that was have herbal therapies that we have to ask about when patients come in, because some of them, if they've taken certain herbs for pregnancy and we give them a drug called Pitocin, can really be hard on a woman. They have, and they have some potency meds that they swear by, and some of the volunteers have taken some sprigs back with them. And there's another one that if there's marital discord, if you slip a little of this herb in the tea,
into whose tea? The man's tea, the woman's tea?
Woman's tea, then somehow she will forgive all your wrongs and become very amorous. And so that's been a popular thing for some of the tourists. So,
is this something we can market back in the United States?
Yeah, I guess so. I don't want the FDA to break down all the ingredients, but yeah, but the number one thing for the Abafumu is they really care.
Okay.
They really care.
Yeah.
When you see a traditional healer, they'll spend a couple hours with you and talk to you about family and all these issues that, if you've ever been to a doc lately in the United States, they're looking at a computer and
it's a questionnaire. It's like 100 questions, it seems. Yeah. What have you been doing the last couple of weeks, months? They're very thorough. Yeah. It's very a holistic approach to medicine is, I'm not going to tell you, but I think it's probably very important.
It is. So the Abafumu, you get your bang for the buck if you see an Abafumu. I don't agree with the therapy, obviously, but as far as, practitioner-patient relationship, they exemplify the best of it. They really care. They inquire about your family and your practices, and they take the time.
Yeah.
Whereas kind of the modern Western physician seems to be pressed for time. 7 to 10.
Oh yeah, so many. One thing that my friends notice, I notice, when you're here at the hospital, people are not necessarily, they're specialized, they're very good at what they do, but they see a huge variety of people, and maybe they have more time to go in depth with individual patients versus in the United States, it's very small windows of time. You'll see the doctor for maybe 15 minutes or whatever, and they'll be, specialists at one or two particular things, and that'll just be, the way things are. And things are definitely different here in Africa. And, so we've covered, some of the early life and what brought you to the start of the path. We've talked a little bit about how, the challenges have unfolded and how you came to be here today. But now I'm kind of curious about, what do you think the challenges of the present are? What do you think the future is going to be like here? What are your hopes?
Well, you work with the BDP.
Yes, sir.
And one of the huge challenges is, how do you get a hunter-gatherer people? They're not even Stone Age. They use sharpened arrows, fire sharpened arrows. They never use even, stones for their, their points on the arrows. So, how do you bring them and give them all the amenities of the 21st century, and yet allow them to keep the essence of their culture? Because they got a lot of things to teach us. How do you do that?
Man.
And that's a real wrestle, and I would appreciate your thoughts on it, because, you got another week here, but I know you can't answer the meaning of life there, but basically, how do you do that? And that's one of the things, and I've asked anthropologists. I actually had a chance to speak at the United Nations.
Because part of the thing is,
that's a question that people can't answer.
The problem is almost lingual. Kind of, you pointed at this earlier, that they don't have a future tense in their language. They don't have a written language. And when they were evicted in 91, there was a huge amount of death that happened, right? The average life expectancy was 28. Infant mortality was like, I forget what it was, but horrific.
Under 5 mortality, 38%.
Yeah. And so Dr. Grogan and I talked a little bit about this. Maybe we were off camera when we did that, but she was putting an idea together to get camera crews out here and document the stories of the Batwa elders on video, because it can't be written. They might not speak Ruchiga, and they definitely don't speak English, but document those stories and those histories so that they can be translated into Ruchiga, into English, and that way at least it can be preserved. I think the preservation is going to be very important, because I do think that during that massive amount of death in the last 30 to 40 years, I think a colossal amount has just been lost. It's just gone now. It's not coming back, and there's a very small amount of time window, because the Batwa elders, some of these people are in their mid 80s. They're getting to be that point where there's not much time left, and that needs to be preserved like as soon as possible, because I think the Batwa of today are struggling with survival, and they're struggling with finding skills. One thing that we did yesterday is we brought a bunch of sewing machines to the community, and the various communities. There was something like 20 or 30 sewing machines that were given out, and then on Monday we're going to start sending trainers out there to train people how to repair clothing and how to make clothing. This is a shirt not made by a Batwa, but it was made in town, and the tailor that made this shirt is going to be out there training people and giving classes. And the things that we're talking about, I did a proposal for the coffee shop that we want to build on the property nearby, and giving the Batwa barista skills, coffee growing, roasting, selling, marketing, those kinds of things, not just crafts, but what I'm saying is, I'm a long-winded way of saying that these people are struggling with coming online into this economy and into the world where they now need to use money to buy goods, and they need to specialize. They aren't hunter-gatherers anymore. They can't do that. They get shot if they enter the forest to do that. And so yeah, you asked, what do we need to do to preserve the culture? Move fast now, and then in 50 years or so, when the grandkids and the great-grandkids are born, and they are now able to participate in the economy, and they have that extra time to think about, well, where did I come from? What is my history? That's something that in the United States, we have this huge population of, descendants of slaves that don't have a history. They don't have their native song. They don't have their cultures and traditions that they should have, because it simply was lost and taken from them. Lost is a very generous word. Taken from them is the more apt one. So I think it's the same. It's a similar story here in Uganda, where these people are going to lose their culture, and we should be able to answer that question for them, or give them the tools to research, so that they can preserve their culture, and then it's up to them to carry it on in a way that blends with modern society. But yeah,
that's true. When we first came and started, because the path to the future, I thought, would be through education. And so we went around to the villages talking to the Batwa about, we'll help support all your kids. But, you have to have your own docs and accountants and nurses and, politicians. You need to be educated so you can engage the society and support yourself. And just no traction. And so after going to numerous villages over several months, I finally said, okay, hey, what's the problem? And the answer was, don't we have anything to teach our own children? You're trying to put them in Bachiga stools, Batwa, so that was a knife in the heart. So I said, okay, hey, go teach them. And they said, our culture is from the forest. Unless we have forest, we cannot teach. I said, oh, man, that's too bad, because they lost forest in 91. And it was preserved to protect the mountain gorillas. So I said, okay, we got a deal. If I can find you forest, will you send your kids to school? Yes. So about a year later, turns out we're able to buy 150 acres of old-growth forest. And that's where they have this cultural experience, where they can take the kids on the weekends and teach them
I've been in there.
Traditions. That's right.
It's amazing. Like right behind the guest house you know, we got all this forest. I was walking through there the other day when it was raining, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. You know,
Yep.
very quiet, peaceful. You know, it's amazing back there. The jungle is truly amazing, and I wish that it wasn't so strictly guarded by the government and all of the armed guards that are running around and people that stare at you if you walk into the forest. They truly don't want, especially the Mzungu type, tourist type, to be there and enjoy. You know, they want you to pay to enter, essentially.
That's right.
And you know, I'm a Colorado guy. I'm a Minnesota guy. I'm used to grabbing the backpack and the walking stick and being able to just go into nature and be away from people. And that's something that, you know, it's hard to find here. You know, I can only imagine that, you know, the Batwa, right? That's their entire culture that was essentially stolen from them. But yeah, I really enjoy the little patch of jungle that we have. I mean, how many acres is it? Maybe like 3?
Well, that behind the rest house, but we have 100, 150 up on the side of the mountain, right behind us here. And that's where they go and stay for the weekend.
So maybe this is slightly off track of what we were talking about, but where does all this money come from?
Hopefully for some of your viewers here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's people have been exceedingly generous beyond belief. And folks just come alongside and believe in the work. You know, we have integrity. All the funds will go, you know, directly to the Batwa if that's where you're designated. And a lot of people can't come and be like you, engage the culture, but they can support the work.
Right.
And they do. And I've been amazed at the generosity of strangers. You know, they'll never meet, never know the Batwa, never meet, never know the dominant tribal group, the Bachiga. And yet they've opened up their hearts and their purses and their wallets to help out. And I find it just overwhelming how generous people have been to support the work here. Because without that generosity, it never would have happened.
I know. I can only imagine. You know, just how difficult any of this would have been. It would have been impossible. You know, without the help and the contribution of, you know, generous donors. And I think you know, it's so hard to capture your personality. I feel you're a very elusive man. You know, you're very humble. You know, you probably don't like to talk about your methods or give yourself, you know, too much credit in this whole scheme of things. But I see you. I see you. And I know that you have incredible gifts that you have given and shared with the world. And one of those incredible gifts that I think, man, I wish more of us had, you know, more good people had, was inspiring others, you know, to donate. And how do you do that? Because you have a talent. You have a talent in so many different areas, right? Gifted doctor. I've been there personally as you've evaluated buildings. You know, I've seen you lead meetings. I've seen you talk about the future of, you know, indigenous peoples. You know, you engage on so many different levels, so many different talents and skills that come to a point and that you have developed and you have created. You know, you're a truly unique individual. But I think one of those very, very unique skills that I've never experienced or seen it. I've seen people that can run meetings. You know, I've seen people with vision. You know, multifaceted people. But how do you get people to donate?
Yeah, it's
how do you do it?
You don't ask for money.
Yeah. How can that be? How do you get money if you don't ask for money? Man.
If, for instance, you know, Bitcoins and if you thought our relationship was predicated on something besides a friendship, if you thought it was predicated on me trying to squeeze some money out of you, we'd never be friends. I mean, we could be friends, but it'd be at a distance. And that's not what I want. That's not what you want. You know, what you've given these people is yourself. You know, maybe you'll give some money around the edges, but you're giving yourself. And that's the greatest gift you can give by far, beyond belief. And if I have a donor that says, I'd like to give a couple of $1,000, I say, okay, buy a ticket and come over. And then if you have some extra money, you may donate. But if you come and you see and you experience, then your life will be changed. And so a lot of the donors have just come over. I mean, I don't have to say anything. You hang out with the Batwa, you hang out in the hospital, and and go on that malnutrition ward or something like that, and your life's changed, and you say, "I'd like to be part of this." So I've never in 20 some odd years ever asked for money. Just kind of building friendships, writing a few emails, telling them what's going on, and if people want to donate, then we have a foundation. I say, this is where you go. But don't expect me to talk to you about money, because it's not. I feel uncomfortable with it, and I think it would infringe upon our relationship.
I think just telling your story is very motivating for people, inspirational. I struggle to find the right word, but surely, when I have gone to the various lodges with you to drink and meet the tourists, you have that presence, that genuine presence with people, where you'll go up to them, they'll be staring at their phones or playing at their iPads, or having a drink, looking off into the distance, enjoying the view. But you'll come up to anybody and you'll be like, "Hey, where are you from? Did you see the gorillas today? Have you had a good experience here?" And then you just kind of walk into the conversation, and you're like, "Hey, if you want to come visit the hospital, if you want to come meet some Batwa, you want to know more about the history, here's this, that, or the other thing." I think it's very remarkable, because you have this practiced ability. I think maybe you practice this. Maybe it seems like you do have an approach, and I appreciate how genuine it is. And we're meeting all sorts of people, and sometimes people are actually reading your book.
But don't you, when you travel, I find that you're far more open than home. You've got everything pretty dialed in. You got your friends, your groups, your meetings, your job, your exercise routine. If anybody kind of interrupts that, I find it a hard time in America. If somebody's in a coffee shop to go, "Hey, what's happening to you? How's your life going?" But here, I mean, when you travel, it kind of opens you up to experiences and opens you up to meeting other people. You come here with an experience to see the gorillas. That's a totally delightful, out of the traditional experience. And because of that, you're in Africa and get challenged in ways you never thought about. It's really easy for a traveler to talk. By the way, they're here. This is one of the unique communities in the world where communities right next to the park. And you see the park right behind us. And most of the times they got buffer zones, which keeps me and the local population never meeting a tourist. So the tourist comes, and their experience of the locals is, how do you want your coffee? You want your steak rare? That's the experience of the locals. But here at these lodges, people, "Well, you work here? Oh, what's it like? What do you do?"
People have been shocked, when I say, "Oh, I've been here for 2 months, this many weeks or that many weeks." People are genuinely very surprised. They're like, "How could you do it?" And I'm like, "It's actually really enjoyable. You would really like it here if you stuck around and got involved, and lived with the people." I think that's something that I learned very early on, is that you can learn something from anybody. For a while, I was very egotistical. I thought, maybe I knew all the answers, or maybe I could read all the answers. But no matter who they are, you can always learn something. And you'll definitely learn a lot if you come to Africa, especially this part. And but yeah, I think that's I try and I want to be like my mentors, right? And I want to be like you in a lot of ways. And that's something that I think makes you very special, is you're very outgoing, very, very outgoing. And you just walk up to people and you introduce yourself. It gets to be like, "Oh, Scott Kellermann's doing his thing again," where we're stopping the vehicle in Queen Elizabeth. We're asking where the lions are. We're asking where people are going and how they're doing. I mean, we're just stopping vehicles. Like, we're just waving at people, stopping their vehicle, and chatting it up. If either Ruchiga or English or whatever language it need be.
And they're not taken aback.
No,
I mean, they enjoy it too.
Absolutely. I think that's something that I've made several observations about you. Very humble. You don't make any of this about yourself in any way. Very outgoing. but also very, very direct. And I think these are all right brain skills. You know what I mean? These are all skills that don't involve logic. They're very, emotionally in tune. That's what it takes. And I think that's one of the big things that I learned being an engineer and as a professional, that certainly you need knowledge. You need expertise. You need to know what the right decision is. But it's the human element that determines success. It's your connection to others and getting them to believe that your answer is the correct one, right? And I think that can go wrong. That can steer a lot of people wrong. If you get the wrong politician or the wrong ideas, it doesn't matter what the idea was or the expertise was. It matters about the connection, right?
That's true.
So I think a question that I had for you definitely is, how do you get people to listen? Because you very clearly have the right ideas and the right approaches, and you have so much success to point back to. But how do you get people to listen?
Well, I think it's all about the experience. I really believe life is full of experiences. You read about it in the book or somebody tell you about it or a lecture on it. But the experience, back to fundraising, probably our largest donor was a woman and her husband I knew back in our hometown. I didn't know him so well. I was her doc, but I didn't know him really well because he was healthy. And she has traveled, I don't know how many, 130 some odd countries in the world, always upper deck, always first class, always, and everything's got to go right. And so she came to Uganda to work with us years ago. And
the first class experience still comes in on a bumpy dirt road. So
did. And we picked her up at her fabulous hotel, and she came to stay with us. And our abode was really humble. It was difficult. And, we took her to see lions, and she's sitting on the top of our ambulance and got her eye to eye with lions in the trees. And we brought her down, and we were doing mobile clinics. We had no hospital or anything. And I'm a doc. I said, well, I don't know, but we don't need docs. We need people to care. And what do you want me to do? I said, well, you got some kids here with these wounds that need to be cleaned and on and on. She said, well, can I do? I said, yeah, you can do it. Here's some gloves. This is what you do. And she and my wife sat there scrubbing wounds, cleaning them up, giving these kids antibiotics, these tropical ulcers that are common. And so anyway, about a year later, I was back at her house, and she makes coffee table books of every adventure she takes. And one was this African safari. It was a fabulous trip. And, oh, by the way, she came to see me, Carol and myself. And I said, oh, wonder what she said about us. So I flipped through the page, and sure enough, it's the day at the Bwindi, and she says, the best day of our life. I thought, what? How can it be? You stayed in a horrible place, so there's no hot water. The toilet was a pit latrine, 50 feet away, and you're sitting there on the ground cleaning ulcers of kids that are screeching in the process. And so I asked her, I said, how in the world? She said, it's the first time on our travel we really engaged the people. Felt like we were there with them and got to know them. And ever since then, she's been back maybe 8 or 10 times and donated. It's incredible. But that experience of really intimately that you've had here is intimately getting to know people that you're serving and realizing that, they got some challenges in their life, but they have joy, and that's the joy you guys share. And that's what she felt and experienced, and ever since then, she's been intimately engaged with it. Yeah. I've never asked her for any money.
I think that's the biggest tragedy in this little community, is just like the contrast between the tourists and the locals, and life, and life, the differences that the lives have. And I feel like if tourists spent more than 2 days here, or one night or 2 nights or however many nights it is, if they actually spent a little bit of time with the people here, we would have so many more donors. We would have so many more people engaged in this community. And that's what's remarkable. That's what I really have enjoyed about my experience here, is that there's such a deep history to the place. there's so much nuance to the local politics, the bigger politics, the town, the city, the people, the lives. There's so much more depth here than if you're just driving through as a tourist and you're just seeing the gorillas. You would have no idea that the hospitals here, that these people are working and trying to, fight an uphill battle in this way or that way. But there's an entire school down the road from here that's training, the next generation of doctors and nurses. Well, nurses right now. But I feel like if people didn't have this rigid structure of time where they were just coming here to see a couple of things, do a little safari, see some birds, take some pictures, and then they're gone about as soon as they get here. If people could have that chance to just slow down and see what's happening here, I feel like there would be, much more of an engagement, feeling of like, wow, I was really like here. I saw something unique. You were saying that your friend here said it was like the best day of her life when she was able to slow down and do that.
Yep.
And that's something that I have discovered in my travels. I've been to some 25 countries or whatever, and I'm usually eating with the locals, traveling with the locals, trying to get away from those tourist destinations, see the world as it is, and I've really cherished this time and this opportunity I've had to come here and be here. And yeah. And you kind of made it possible for me. So thank you so much.
Really well. I enjoy having you as a neighbor here too.
Yeah. When they were like, Scott's staying here, and then I came visit, a month or two ago, and I was like, dang, look at this view.
Yep.
Now I've been living for maybe 5 weeks or so with, solar panels. So my battery will die in the middle of the night. My laptop doesn't charge. There's no Wi-Fi, there's no internet, but you get a great view. You get sometimes peace and quiet.
And you've seen the gorillas.
And I've seen the gorillas. They wander right up and they eat the bush here, the little tea leaves. And it's been great. And then, just working with the BDP and, being able to see the challenges. I think that's what I'm going to probably think about the most. Finding the money, great. I appreciate your very positive attitude whenever you're talking about renovations or new constructions. You're like, we'll find the money. We just need a plan. We need people to execute. We need a future.
That's right.
So I don't know. What do you hope the future is going to be for this area? What do you want the future for the Batwa to be like? What's your, if everything went perfectly from here on out, which it won't, but
yeah, obviously, if we're sticking to the present tense, it's hard to speak about the future. However, I'd like the Batwa to be, somehow engaged in their own destiny, and it not be a reactive type thing. They get kicked out of the forest. They have to react to a situation like that. I would like them to be more proactive about saying, this is where we would like to be at a certain time in the future. This is what education we need, and houses and water and sanitation and our culture. And that's hard to know with the people that then don't have much of a future tense. But if they can define their own destiny, I'd be perfectly happy. I mean, you've come in and helped, particularly with IT. I've come help with medical and all this, but the Batwa need their own voice, and hopefully they can raise up folks that will do IT or do medicine.
I think Batwa leadership is what's going to be very important. Is you look around the BDP, and it's a lot of Buchiga, right? And you might just look around and be like, oh, this is fine, but once you spend a couple of weeks listening and watching the comings and goings, I think it was a little bit telling for me when I was talking about the coffee shop and being like, the Batwa should be the ones that are working behind the counter. And it was kind of, I can pick up on the vibe a little bit sometimes, but the vibe that I got was that people didn't really believe that it was possible that the Batwa could show up at a certain time, pour a cup of coffee, smile and say, here's your change, those kinds of things. And I'm like, how is this the Batwa development program if we don't really believe that the Batwa can hold a job, it's we need the Batwa running the BDP, right? And
Oh,
you
we
were
did.
talking about that at the latest, team meeting a week or two ago.
Yeah, there's a lot of pushback.
Yeah.
But pushback again from the Batwa, because the majority of Batwa we've heard, kind of come in late, leave early, take off time when they
That's
want
something
it.
that I don't understand. It's
And
like you have family, your people, your literal people, your tribe needs you, and this is your golden opportunity to represent them and to, make a better future for your children, your grandchildren. You have access to the Kellermann Foundation. Like, man, I hope people don't take you and the foundation for granted. But in a way, it seems like they just kind of think that this will always be around and things will never
yep,
change.
I
And
agree.
it's going to change 100%.
Yeah, it has to. I mean, but you talk about family, and when you greet people on the street, the Uganda, Oriota, Smart Kukareba, all those kind of greetings, they're formal greetings, and you have to do it. But one of the questions is, Amuka Baribata, how is your family? And if your family's not well, and oh, by the way, when we first came, it was a misdemeanor. If you said something like, hi, how are you, fine, and you walk by, that was a misdemeanor. You could be fined for it.
For not doing it.
For not, for not, for not engaging in a conversation. How are you doing? Fine is not a conversation. And you would have to, when you pass somebody, how are you? How's your chickens and goats? And and if there was a problem, you were expected to go help. Yeah. Oh, Machar, I'm weary. My wife is sick. What's the matter? How is she? Oh, how can I help? If you're on the way to work, you go in a different direction. You're going to go help. And that's the essence of the culture. So it's a little hard when you say, well, you got an 8 to 5 here to support your own people, but their people are people in their clan and the people in their family. So they will frequently, you know, they're easily distracted by other items with respect to their family. And so the question is, should you pay somebody for a 40-hour week when they're giving you 30, or when they're coming in late or leaving early? I don't know. I'm of the view to cut them slack. That over the course of years, they will learn. But there are people that say, no, if you show up late, you're out of here. So,
but the Batwa, it's a big tribe. There's a lot of people. There's especially like a lot of young people. And, that's where the future is going to be, is getting those young people in place. And I definitely want to sit down and talk with Aruna a little bit more. I want to get to know that guy better. Because, there's quite a few.
He's a complicated guy.
Yeah, there's quite a few.
I like Aruna a lot. And I think he's the future of the BDP.
Yeah.
Smart, well-educated, focused. He's got a future tense. He knows what he wants. He knows he wants to help the people.
Yeah. I look forward to working with him as the years unfold. That's something that we were talking about last night over some drinks.
Yeah.
Was that between, he and I, we got a lot of time. I think one of the things that really blows me away is that you started this project just 20 years ago, basically. And look at all the stuff that you've done in 20 years. I think one of our first conversations was, when did this place start? Because it looks like, it's been rained on. It's got, it's been weathered. Like this place just weathers buildings so fast. And I was like, man, this place looks like it was built in like the 60s. How long has this been here? And you're like, oh, only 20 years, 18 years. Some of those buildings are like 5-10 years old. And I was just blown away. I was floored. Like, wait a minute. We've only been doing this for like 20 years?
That's right.
What do you mean? We've done all of this? Like there's an entire community here now. Like it's like, Buhomo, right? The shops and the little businesses and the restaurants and things, maybe that would be here just with the lodges, but your nursing school is bringing in tons of people into the area, people that need to spend money,
Sure.
The hospital employs like 300 people. Like there's this entire like little stretch of cities is mostly, prospering and succeeding because of the hospital and what has been built here, by you and your foundation and the donors and all these people. And Holy cow.
And by the local population.
And it's been only 20 years. And I'm like, hey, Aruna, between the two of us, we got 50 years.
Yeah.
Like, let's go. Let's see what we can do. Now that's what I want to see. Mm-hmm. And he was talking about maybe leaving, or leaving the country, leaving the area, going to Kampala. And I'm like, dude, we can't leave. Look at this. Look at what's been done here in such a short amount of time. Like, the good people can't leave. The good people have to stay and commit and help.
Help their own people.
Yeah, help their own people, for sure.
He can make more money in Kampala, and he would be very good there, but it'd be a tremendous loss.
It'd be a tremendous loss, yeah. That's what you need, role models within your own communities and your own people. Mm. Yeah. So I know we've been going for a little while. Mm. Maybe you want to take a break or stop?
That'd be good. Yeah.
Okay. One last question.
What?
One last question before we'll wrap it up. If you could say anything to the world right now, because there's a lot going on in the world. What do you want to leave us with? What do you think is important? What do you think people need to be carrying with them in their mind?
Yeah. Man, when you ask that question, comes when George W. Bush met with Bono, and Bono convinced him to take on HIV in Sub-Saharan Africa. He raised a bunch of money, billions, and he got pushback. And his comment was, to those who have been given much, much is required. PEPFAR's under fire right now. We wonder if he can continue it. It saved at least 25 million lives and prevented 6 million kids from developing HIV. So I think that's the watchword is, we in America have been given so much. The blessings have just been poured upon us. And I think more is required of us. And that the requirement is to serve in some way. It could be your neighbor, it could be homeless or something, or somebody who's got cancer, or somebody that needs your help. I mean, it's been said that God doesn't need our help, but your neighbor does. And so I really believe that there's a lot of neighbors out there. It could be the Batwa. It's not for everybody. But certainly in your community. And I really think that things like this find you. If you open your heart. When we first came here, my wife never wanted to come. It was kicking and screaming. She came. And when we arrived, she said, I feel like I've come home. And then after a few weeks, well, actually about 5 weeks, she said, I think we ought to go home and sell everything and come help these people out. And I was just coming here engaging in
complete change in direction.
Oh, like boom. But I think that's what happens in a life of service, that somehow your heart, these things find you and change your life in ways you never could have imagined. And the result, I think, is the world's a far better place. I can tell you, Matthew, for sure, the world's a better place because you came. The world's a better place because you engaged the hospital, the BDP, went to the refugee camp. At the refugee camp, you did not do much, but you gave them the gift of presence that you were there. And that's what they appreciate. And actually, when we went subsequent refugee camp, they were asking about you because they remember that. And you may not have remembered any of the interactions, but they remember you.
I will actually remember those interactions for my whole life.
Yeah.
And my God, I'll definitely be remembering our time together, and I look forward to having many more adventures with you. And I know we're going to be in touch. And I just run out of words, sometimes. I'm somebody who takes pride in, always being able to come up with the next thing to say or the next sentence. But I think there just aren't enough. There just aren't enough words. So thank you for being my mentor.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thanks
for our friendship.
Yes, sir.
It's a real gift to me.
I look forward to seeing how this evolves into the future. We have a lot to do here, don't we?
We do.
We got to get to work.
But we have a lot of fun even today, right now.
Yes, sir.
So thanks for this opportunity.
Absolutely. And thank you to everyone for listening.
Yeah, we'll come the same way.
Please visit the foundation's website. Maybe donate if you're feeling generous. And definitely come out and visit, spend some time in the Bwindi area.